Welcome to the sixth annual Food Justice Film Festival presented by the Center for Biological Diversity. I'm Linda Rico, Food Justice Film Festival Coordinator with the Center. I'm so happy to be joined today by Raphael Sbarge, Emmy Award winner and director of the film LA Foodways, which is featured in this year's festival. Welcome, Raphael, and thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I absolutely enjoyed watching LA Foodways. There was such a big part of LA's very early farming history that I had no idea about. What inspired you to tell this story?
Yeah, I guess it's a series of things, I mean, it's funny how one kind of gets to kind of an idea, but I read a few books. One was this, which I found so striking, right? Which is that I lived in LA for many years, and I didn't understand that LA wasn't just a farm community, it was the largest farming community in the US.
Right.
And that's because of the weather. It's a year-round growing season,
Hmm.
but it's an exquisite place to grow things, and it all kind of ended very suddenly in around 19 well after the war in the early 50s basically, and people rushed in, and the farmers sold their farmland thinking that they'd made a killing, and almost overnight, this city was transformed into kind of what it is now, which is sort of really a concrete jungle.
Hmm.
Beyond that, I was also sort of so struck by the kind of with other reading, what is really the kind of the food crisis, the food availability crisis, and
Hmm.
then in addition to that, that LA is a giant food desert,
Hmm.
meaning that there are people who don't have access within easy distance to get fresh fruit and vegetables, and that their options are more fast food than anything,
Right.
and the kind of the irony of that, telling that story. um here we have incredible farmland
Hmm.
paved over, and there's no way to get food fresh. so
Right.
so so how do you tell that story? So the more I read, the more I kind of got fascinated with really this sort of historical story. So really what LA Foodways was a sort of kind of a very ambitious attempt. And I have to say is that I worked very closely with KCET. Well, now it's called
Hmm.
PBS SoCal, but
Right.
with Juan Devis and Angela Boyford, who are essentially the kind of the development people. Juan was the president of
Wow.
of the network, and I was bringing to him these ideas, and he kind of helped develop it. He did this kind of thing that was kind of really wild, which was he said, okay, so we need a 1 hour movie in a 6 part series. And the thing about PBS generally,
Hmm.
unlike other networks, is that they don't put a
Hmm.
lot of money into a show. They kind of, you sort of bring the idea and having fundraised, and then
Right.
they give you this wonderful platform.
Hmm.
They also give you a lot of development support and graphics and legal and all sorts of other things that are wonderful for filmmakers. But
Hmm.
but they're very smart, and he is really challenged me in all the right ways. And so, how do you tell a story about a food desert in LA?
Hmm.
Well, you set it against essentially the backdrop of how it got to be there. So it's really like 175 years of kind of the
Yeah.
history.
Right.
And then from that, and this will probably go to another question, so you could ask your next question, which is just essentially to say that I was also really interested in all the organizations that were doing kind of really incredible work in the community,
Hmm.
to
Right.
highlight what's happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was so eye-opening. I mean, I like how you mentioned that LA County was once the largest farming county in the nation, was pretty incredible to learn. I mean, I had no idea about that. And also what I found to be really eye-opening was how some of the now most notoriously marginalized neighborhoods, such as Compton and Watts, for example, used to be areas that had like the most valuable agriculture. I mean, they had the most beautiful land. Can you expand more on why those areas were so crucial to LA's early farming days in terms of why that land in those areas was so highly coveted?
Yeah, I mean, part of what makes LA such a great, remarkably rich soil, and I spoke to the 92-year-old farmer that I speak to in the movie. Um, he talked about how he used to farm what's now called Century City. And
Hmm.
he said,
Wow.
that land, he said, I used to do artichokes over there. He said that was the best land. And everyone that I spoke to, all the farmers said that, the land in LA is some of the best soil.
Hmm.
Part of that is because of the LA River, which is another interesting story. I made another movie about that. And
Oh, okay, interesting.
um, again, which is astounding in its scope and the history of it. The LA River was the reason why the Spaniards who were out looking to basically um, find land for their queen and their king,
Hmm.
they were out discovering and they came across the river. The river is a wild river, or was a wild river,
Hmm.
meaning that during the rainy months it would kind of move. It had a bit of a trench, but it would move.
Hmm.
And it was verdant and rich and green. And because it moved, what happened is that the sediment from the river would also then go into the soil. And it's part of what also then made it such wonderful
Wow.
soil. Um, and the story of the LA River is that ultimately it got corralled, and
Hmm.
the Army Corps of Engineers for really um, kind of economic and real estate reasons, they kind of turned it into essentially like a rifle barrel to shoot water into the ocean. It's a cool story,
Wow.
but that's part of why the ground is so good. And
Wow.
anyway, the area in Watts and Compton was again, they were just nothing but alfalfa fields, and
Hmm.
and beautiful. Everyone had fruit trees, and
Hmm.
it was a but look, all of LA. I mean, there was a huge citrus industry. I mean, I have
Right.
friends who live in the valley.
Hmm.
That's where a lot of the citrus industry began. And I have a friend. She's got this fantastic orange tree
Hmm.
um, that is probably 100 years old, and
Hmm.
it puts off the most amazing oranges. Well, that tree is a survivor of what was essentially thousands and thousands of acres of citrus. That is,
Right.
lemon, lime, oranges, and there was again, all of that got plowed and turned into a place that's wonderful for vegetables all year round is also, of course, what we like because it's the most temperate and
Right.
it's not like living in Chicago, right? Or
Yeah.
New York. That's what drew all the people here.
Hmm.
But that's what vegetables and fruit love as well.
Right. Yeah, the film reminds us too, how, you mentioned the citrus industry and there was this huge explosion, right, in this industry and so many people coming. Um, but that industry, was built on the backs of indigenous, Latino, Black, and Asian people. How did this like big surge of people and the immigrants who were working in this industry help create the Los Angeles that we know today?
Oh, I mean, that's such a big story in of itself, and it's so. I have to take a deep breath because it's so sad to me what's happening now, and it's so
Hmm.
tragic.
Right.
And point in fact, actually, you know, um, once again, decisions have been made that are not don't consider people, and there's just kind of been a just a horrible othering that has created an atmosphere of hate and fear,
Mhm.
and many people are suffering as a result. Los Angeles, Los Angeles was originally actually a huge a cattle area, as I remember,
Hmm.
and there just were all sorts of sort of cowboys from Mexico who
Hmm.
were looking after these enormous ranches. There was then a drought. The
Hmm.
drought then essentially kind of shut a bunch of that down, and
Hmm.
then it sort of shifted into then what became industry,
Hmm.
and a lot of the sort of I want to say fruit and the fruit industry basically moved to California, and all of that was built on really on the backs of people who were laborers who are trying to feed their family and trying to live, good lives and wanted to get paid and couldn't get paid or couldn't get hired elsewhere.
Hmm.
And it's a tragic, honestly, heartbreaking story. I mean, you can go back even a step further, even to the so-called Native Americans and what we did. I mean, all
Right.
the original I mean, they were ravaged by these literal colonizers who
Hmm.
opened these missions, and then they, put them through Catholic schools and gave them smallpox and on and
Wow.
on and on. I mean, it's just the country that is America that has, many ideals of
Hmm.
kindness and really have the pursuit of happiness. It doesn't. It has a pretty um, tough history, at times
Right.
almost savage history.
Right.
I any of us who try and tell these stories, it's yeah. I mean, I was very taken by Watts. I was very taken
Hmm.
by the people of Watts.
Hmm.
There's a story about Tim and Ted Watkins
Hmm.
that I met Tim Watkins in the course of making this, and then went on to make my another movie. Well, actually, it started as a movie and it turned into a four-part series called
Hmm.
10 Days in Watts, and it's about a farm that
Hmm.
opens at the foot of one of the most notorious housing projects
Right.
in Watts,
Hmm.
and it's an incredible story.
Yeah.
And the Watts pride and the sense of kind of we don't have much, but we have love and we care for
Hmm.
one another. And
Right.
and and yes, there's gangs, and yes, everyone knows kind of where you can and can't go, but there's
Hmm.
just a tremendous sense of pride about what they have, even though they
Right.
are the most underserved neighborhood. If you
Hmm.
think just the insane, almost obscene wealth that exists just a few miles north.
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
it's shocking and again very tough. I sorry, I'm having a whole bunch of thoughts. I mean, one of the things that when one decides to want to tell a story about the
Hmm.
environment, about history,
Hmm.
about kind of the complicated, and it's always complicated world we live
Right.
in.
Hmm.
Um, I believe as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you have a choice, and I don't, there's no right or wrong choice. There's just the choice. And the choice
Hmm.
essentially is this. Do you come in and, as they say, ring the bell? That is essentially show how bad it is,
Hmm.
really take people into how terrible it is, and
Hmm.
then show them more about how terrible it is, and then leave them kind of by the end of the movie sort of devastated and
Right.
and perhaps, aware in a way that they weren't.
Hmm.
Or do you tell a story that is able to allow them to find a way in and open up possibility and not sugarcoat how terrible it is, but
Hmm.
not necessarily aim for that in the story's intent. That what you're
Right.
trying to do is actually sort of bring them in. So what I did in this case was I focused on multiple nonprofits that were doing this incredible work.
Yeah.
And Tim Watkins and the WLCAC, which is
Hmm.
the community organization in Watts, which has
Hmm.
been there for 60 years, are one of them. And all, despite the challenges, despite the devastating, statistics about, food scarcity and hunger and how many people, don't know where their next meal is coming from,
Hmm.
which we made this a couple years ago. This is before, COVID. This is before
Right.
the fires. This is before
Hmm.
current, I don't even know what you call it.
Yeah.
Just crackdown, I guess. Um, I shudder to think. There are a lot of organizations that are
Hmm.
doing really important work locally that are really there trying to be support systems and
Hmm.
or leaders as far
Hmm.
as actually connecting dots for people and
Right.
and providing for them, um, not just the meal for tonight, but medical advice and legal
Hmm.
advice and you know um, gang resolution and family planning and on and on and on.
Yeah.
There are a lot of organizations, and more often than not, those organizations are small. They're
Hmm.
mighty, but they're small,
Hmm.
and they are running on tight margins, and they have big ideas, but
Hmm.
small budgets. Um,
Yeah.
so so I decided to try and tell a story about how tough it was, but show these organizations because maybe it was a way for people to be able to plug in, to be able
Hmm.
to sort of imagine themselves being a part of the solution.
Right. I thought you did a great job. I mean, I think you did a great job capturing this history that a lot of people may not know about. Los Angeles, we hear LA, and pretty much everybody is probably thinking the same thing about LA. It's like fun and the place to be and celebrity and just everything, the ocean, and it's just we don't really think farming, and
Oh,
farmland. Like nobody really thinks about that. So I thought you did a really great job bringing in that history, and also explaining parts of some of the difficult history as well, and and then showing the solution. Like, you covered the Watts riots also, or the Watts rise, and you had people in the film who were explaining what that was about, how it was a response to injustices that were happening in these predominantly Black neighborhoods. And then as a result of the riots, it gave government agencies a big excuse to unfairly disinvest in these neighborhoods, which obviously negatively affected the lives of those living there, especially when it came to access to healthy food. And, learning that, and or just I guess hearing it, but then hearing about the solutions. You talked about how the community had to look to each other, right, to build it back, and they found food access through community gardening. And you brought up Mr. Ted Watkins and the work that he did. Can you talk a little bit more about how he helped with these community gardens and this sort of social justice work that he did for the Watts community?
yeah, it's such a, I mean, well, first of all, if you talk to any the people that I spoke to in Watts,
Mhm.
when you say the words Watts riots,
Mhm.
they stop you and they say,
Mhm.
hold up, those were not what riots.
Mhm.
That was a revolt, and that
Right.
was a response,
Hmm.
to what occurred.
Hmm.
In the specter of what we have learned in the past few years, vis-a-vis George Floyd, et cetera, all the stuff that many people in that community were always aware. They're like,
Yeah.
I heard some people say things like, you know, that was nothing, what they captured on camera. I mean,
Hmm.
I saw so much worse, and of course, Rodney
Yeah.
King, on and on.
Yeah.
And um, the community is aware.
Hmm.
But the two revolts, as it were both
Hmm.
uh, uh, a result of police overstep, essentially, in
Right.
this case.
Hmm.
And I think it was years and years and years of having to kind of try and live with under so much tension that it just
Right.
finally exploded. Um,
Hmm.
I also am aware, the fact is that the community, and it's a small community, right? But they're aware of the fact that they've sort of been branded by these so-called riots, you know?
Hmm.
And a lot of people I know who lived in up in LA and again in the nicer, sections, they've never even been to Watts. They wouldn't
Yeah,
even think about going to Watts. They're like, "Oh my God, you
right.
go down." Like, yeah, I do. It's great. The
Yeah,
people are
it is.
incredible.
It's a great neighborhood. I've spent plenty of
And,
time
and
there myself.
yeah, and so again, racism, which is based upon fear and ignorance, and once again, provides uh, people making choices that are just so limited. So anyway, as relates to what Ted Watkins did, Ted Watkins. Many people don't know about him, but for the folks that do, they really he is so revered and he is so thought of. I mean, he's thought of in a way akin to Cesar Chavez or
Right.
other great community
Yeah.
leaders who
I
did
even worked with him
so.
as well. Incredible.
Yeah, Ted Watkins. I mean, I can tell you sort of. Do you want a little bit of backstory on him because it's kind
Yeah,
of a cool story.
yeah. Go ahead and share a little bit of backstory for our viewers.
Okay, so Ted Watkins basically grew up in Mississippi, and what happened was apparently he got into a fight with a white Western Union man. He refused to get off a sidewalk and essentially got into a fight and broke his rib. He was 13 years old, and so in the middle of the night, he had one of those "We're coming for you," and you're
Mm,
basically lynched the next day. And this was no joke. This was a real deal. So his mother and his stepfather basically they got into a big fight, and he ran and he got on a train and he literally went as far away as he possibly could. He went literally all the way to the end of the line. He landed at Union Station in Los Angeles, and he thought, "Oh my God, I'm just so happy. I'm free. I can
mhm.
start over. I can, I'm gonna start my life." This is, of course, a young 13-year-old homeless
Right.
kid, but he
Yeah.
essentially sort of escaped. He arrives into Union Station, and there in Union Station, of course, he sees a whites only drinking fountain, and
Yeah.
and says, "Oh my God, I traveled all this distance and it hasn't, nothing has changed."
Right.
LA was, it's a pretty shocking reality again for people who are not aware, but the
Hmm.
KKK ran a lot of LA and it was a very
Yeah.
tough place to be if you were non-white.
Hmm.
And and people again are just, you know, they don't know their history. But that what happened was he was very bright and lived on his wits and essentially in his charm. He had both of those in great measure. And he ultimately ended up working at the Ford Motor Plant, which I believe was in the Compton kind of Watts area at the time. And he kind of rose up through the ranks. He was very clearly a leader, and
Hmm.
he had great again charisma, and people really sort of naturally admired him. And Walter
Hmm.
Reuther, arguably one of the greatest kind of labor leaders,
Hmm.
identified him and said, I'm taking you under my wing."
Hmm.
And he then introduced him to Cesar Chavez, and they essentially all worked together.
Yeah.
um, and then the Ford, which at the time was really sort of doing something of wanting to invest and put money back into the community, they essentially identified Ted Watkins as being uh, someone who could open a community center that
Hmm.
is a sort of a community-based organization that would serve the community,
Yeah.
and they set him up with that. That was right though as the first revolt was happening. That was the one
Hmm.
in the 60, 63, 64, I think. I'm trying to get my
Hmm.
date right. Don't hold me to that, but I think that's about the date, right? And right date. And so it was delayed, but then he was able to kind of, he kind of stepped in as they were beginning to try and rebuild. And he built this unbelievable organization, which now
Hmm.
really is the pillar of the community. They
Yeah.
do everything.
Hmm.
They help people, formerly incarcerated. They have, family planning. They do, they work with gangs. They literally distribute food. They have, uh, you know, uh, programs and training and it's unbelievable what they do in terms of the breadth and the depth of how much they reach into the community. And everyone really reveres the Watkins family.
Hmm.
Um, they also well, Ted ultimately passed, but his and parks are named after him, and
Hmm.
he, did many great things. But his son basically has taken up the mantle, and that's Tim
Yeah.
Watkins. And so
Hmm.
this father-son story again is was the basis of the next movie that I did, which is this 10 Days in Watts, and
Hmm.
it won the Emmy now about a year and a half ago, and I'm very proud of that. That's available, and maybe another year I can come back and we can talk about that. But I'm
Absolutely.
um, it's a wonderful story and also tells the history of Watts, but it also talks
Yeah.
about the community and what and in that movie
Hmm.
um, we don't talk about the revolt once
Hmm.
for very for good reason,
Yeah.
because there is in its place enormous what everyone talks about,
Hmm.
Watts
Yeah.
pride, and it's almost as tough as it is. They're willing to kind of take every tough, uh, lack of services, and God, I could go on and on and on in terms of all the things that they've done, but there are so it's so. It's so tough and at times tragic, the living conditions and the circumstances that they
Hmm.
live under.
Hmm.
And their spirits are huge and big and wide and kind and
Hmm.
as authentic as you can possibly get. And Tim, who I kept showing up. I kept showing up and saying, Tim, I think there's a movie here. Tim does a movie. And
Hmm.
he was looking like, who is this guy? And and I said, I really want to tell this story. And ultimately, he said, I trust you. I trust you. He
Hmm.
actually turned to me and he said, I want to tell you something. He says, you're TBV. And I said, Tim, what's that? And he said, trusted but verified. He said, $50 and you go to the store, I come back and I count my change. I know I'm getting my change.
That's funny.
So Tim basically, talked to people and said, talk to this guy. And they did. And it wasn't just, talk to, I mean, I'm very clear that I'm a white guy in a black and brown neighborhood telling the story. Now I live in Harlem in New York, and I'm very comfortable, and I
Yeah.
honestly prefer living in communities like this. But I am um they didn't just not talk to white guys. People that were talking to me didn't talk to anyone, but because Tim had
Yeah.
said you can talk to this guy, they did.
Yeah.
And we got to tell a story that hopefully is sort of a portrait of the neighborhood. But
Yeah.
farming and these communities and the BIPOC community,
Hmm.
they're so integral to the making of Los Angeles,
Right.
of feeding, not just California, by the way.
Hmm.
Los Angeles is literally referred to as the breadbasket of the world. I
Right.
mean, just an astounding amount
Hmm.
of food is produced that's sent everywhere in
Nice.
Los Angeles and the Los Angeles basin.
Hmm.
And so all of that is essentially orchestrated through the BIPOC community working and giving their lives and their souls and feeding their families and they have for many years. They have built
Hmm.
Los Angeles, and
Yeah.
that's just a stone cold truth.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing all of that. You mentioned some really great highlights in the film. One of talking about Ted Watkins and how he, you know, did all of the amazing work that he did for his community, his Watts community. We hear about his finding like the key to achieving success is, land ownership and how they need to get that land back, and turning these paved over areas like back into a community garden so that they can feed their community. And then you bring up obviously the WLCAC, the Watts Labor Community Action Committee, and everything that they do for their community still now in the hands of Ted's son, Tim, as you mentioned. But a point that you brought up is also the acknowledgement of the intersection of the justice movements. You have reproductive justice, environmental justice, food justice, social justice, economic justice, and you really can't have one without the other. They all have to work together. And I think that's what I was hearing you say about the WLCLC is that they saw there are so many moving parts to achieving success for our community and stability for the community. And, in the film, we hear about so many amazing organizations too that are doing things like that, trying to feed community with these leftover trees and these resources of food, all over LA. And you see people out there gathering food, putting them in boxes so it doesn't go to waste. So fighting food waste, feeding people, offering services. And it's a beautiful thing to see. We also hear about the beginning of Mudtown Farms, when Tim talks about that, which is just incredible. I mean, if you could talk a little more about when you got to see the big plot of land that they were looking at and just everything that was going to offer the community, I would love to hear more about that as well.
Yeah, so there is a plot. There was a plot of about 2.5 acres,
Mhm.
right in the middle of Watts. Now, what's distinct about Watts is it is there's so many kind of intense facts about Watts, but one of the things is it is actually the densest neighborhood in all of Los Angeles. Why?
Oh,
Because
wow.
every single time that they say we need to build more, low-income housing, they don't build it in West LA
Hmm.
or or in West Hollywood
Hmm.
or even in Studio City. They go to Watts. They're like, okay,
Hmm.
we're going to build another low-income housing here. And
Hmm.
so what happened is that you have everyone on top of each other. And then
Hmm.
you have a whole lot of housing that's kind of honestly looks like, I want to say 1950s sort of Russian barracks housing,
Hmm.
um, which is it's really brutal, honestly.
Yeah.
And that's where people have lived. A bunch of
Hmm.
that now is finally being torn down, at least some around the last time I went back, some around the farm.
Hmm.
Uh, is starting to be torn down, which is great because it's being
Hmm.
rebuilt
Yeah.
as it should. And also they're because there's so much lead in the water, they're actually addressing some of
Yeah.
the lead and all of that. So
Right.
because the pipes were old and
Hmm.
needed to be changed. So um, this plot was highly coveted by all the developers who wanted to put up another freaking apartment building, right?
Hmm. Right.
And I guess Tim and his family really fought for years and years and years. I
Hmm.
think it was like 12 years to kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
try and get it tied up. And
Hmm.
and it was in and it was out, and it was in and it was out, and then finally they got it. And it's his vision to build not just a green space,
Hmm.
and not just sort of a community space, and not just sort of a training space, but also literally a farm where he could feed the community and
Yeah.
and give away free food. Again,
Hmm.
because it's such good land.
Yeah.
Um, and that's what he did. The whole history of Mudtown, even the name,
Hmm.
is interesting because it's steeped in sort of a racial past, which is
Right.
that um, the people that lived. So Watts is actually the name of a man. I think it's J.C. Watts. I think he was a sort of a businessman, and that's what the kind of the. I guess he was also a landowner, and that's how they named the area
Okay.
after him. But
Hmm.
it was referred to as Mudtown, and why was it Mudtown? Because back in the day when many sort of Black and Latino people lived there,
Hmm.
they didn't pave the streets.
Hmm.
They lived essentially, it was almost like farm, it was farm
Yeah.
land, but it was also very they kind of just sort of left the community as it was, and they
Hmm.
in a very kind of a um, um, I want to say sort of a cruel way, just referred to it as Mud Town,
Yeah.
so to stomp around in mud.
Right.
And Tim, um, uh, for this farm, said, you know what? I just want to throw my arms around that term and just
Yeah.
embrace it in all of
Hmm.
its kind of glory and as it were. And so he called this Mudtown Farms and to say, really kind of as an opportunity to kind of really embrace the past and
Hmm.
really recognize and honor kind of this the I just want to say the racial injustice again that
Yeah.
this community has sort of gone through
Absolutely. Yeah.
and has fought. And
Hmm.
so um 10 days in Watts is essentially the 10 days leading up to the opening of the farm.
Hmm.
And it happened. I mean, it's up and running now, and it is uh serving food to people, and they have big giant tubs of tomatoes and cucumbers and carrots and things that people can
It's
come
incredible.
and again and that community is it's so bereft of I mean, I think there's a food town,
Hmm.
something like that, but
Yeah.
or is it food, no, what is it called? Not food town, what is that called? There's a market, uh f f food for less, that's what it's called.
Less. Okay.
um which is a terrible name. But they there's no Whole Foods, there's no kind of market where you can get there is a free food giveaway that they have at the WLCAC, I
Oh
think
yeah.
twice,
Hmm.
maybe more now. But they have um um an opportunity to be able to not just go for fast food, because there's a lot of just kind of
Right.
drive-through fast food, fried food kind of
Yeah.
options. A lot of kind of convenience store food, which is
Hmm.
chips and processed, and again,
Right.
terrible, kind of, for one's health or hypertension or,
Hmm.
for children's, growing brains and bodies and
Exactly. Uh-huh.
there's all sorts of additional studies leading from, food nutrition to
Hmm.
choices that are maybe not the best choices for people.
Yeah.
Uh, the options are so limited that sometimes, joining a gang or getting involved in criminal undertakings is a response to, just a lack of options
Hmm.
sometimes. I'm not justifying, any criminal, intent, but I'm
Right.
just saying I certainly,
It's all
have been
systemic
aware.
issues that lead to. And
Yeah.
I do want to leave some space too to give you an opportunity to talk about any other projects you're working on. If you have any updates to share or stuff that you will be working on and how our viewers can support it.
Oh, thank you. My day job is that I'm an actor, and but so I have a bunch of acting stuff that I can talk about. The thing that I'm doing in terms of I made another movie about there's a called Only in Theaters, about an art house cinema chain in Los Angeles called the Laemmle Theaters,
Oh, cool.
and it did quite well, and it had a
Hmm.
theatrical run, and it's now available
Hmm.
online. But out of that, Greg Laemmle, who's the CEO of Laemmle Theaters, and I
Hmm.
have a sort of a talk show with filmmakers, that's independent filmmakers,
Oh, nice.
independent foreign and documentary
Hmm.
filmmakers, weekly, whose films are opening in theaters around the country, and
Oh, that's great.
it's called Inside the Art House, and
Okay.
we're available. It's a filmed podcast. It's available on YouTube. We have now 1.7 million views in a year and 300.
Congratulations.
Thank you. 300,000 subscribers. So we're doing well. But Inside the Art House is available if people are interested in movies or new
Great.
movies and or, voices, sort of undiscovered voices, as it were.
That's
It's a cool
wonderful.
place to kind of tune in and learn about that. Um,
What
and
platform is
then
it available on? Is it on like Spotify or Apple
on
or?
Spotify, it's on
Okay.
Apple, and it's on YouTube. It's on Spotify video and audio, and then it's on YouTube,
Great.
which obviously everyone tunes into all the time. And then the acting work. I have a film that's opening today called History of Sound. I have a supporting role in a film with Paul Mescal and Josh
Mhm.
O'Connor. It's a beautiful
Okay.
movie. I'm in a new series called Task with Mark Ruffalo, which started last week on HBO, and it's a
Oh,
seven-part
that's
series.
great.
And
Had an
I'm in,
exciting week then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm some of the later episodes, but it's a great show. And
Mhm.
if you like crime dramas.
Yeah,
And then I did a film called Friendship with Paul Rudd and Tim Robinson that just was in theaters in the spring and is now, I think, on HBO. And it's sort of
wonderful.
cringe comedy and kind of fun. And so those are the things, some of the things I've been doing as an actor. But
That's amazing. We'll definitely put that on our website as well so people can check you out. Well, thank you again so much, Raphael. As a reminder to everyone watching, please don't forget to sign up for this year's Food Justice Film Festival at foodjusticefilmfestival.com. The festival is free to watch all four feature films anytime from October 23rd through the 26th. And you can also catch our 2025 virtual interviews on our site all year long. Thank you all for watching and have a wonderful day.
thanks, Linda.